In this episode, we examine people who were eaten alive during safari trips. From a young boat guide in Botswana who took a shortcut through a reed channel and drifted into a bull hippo's territory, to an exchange student who leaned outside a safari vehicle for a photo of lion cubs, triggering a deadly chain of events. It was June 3rd, 2015, and the Serengeti stretched endlessly under a moonless sky, its vast plains holding dangers that Elina Korhonen would not survive to understand. Elina Korhonen, 27, had been traveling through East Africa for 6 weeks when she arrived in Tanzania. A graphic designer from Helsinki, she had saved for 2 years to make the trip. But a stolen wallet in Nairobi had depleted her budget faster than anticipated. When her funds ran low, she found a budget safari operator through a hostile notice board, an unlicensed outfit charging a fraction of what legitimate companies demanded. Licensed safaris camped in secured zones with fencing, rangers, and strict protocols. Elina's budget operator ignored these rules, setting up in high predator areas. Inexperienced, she trusted his assurances, unaware that the Serengeti's apex predators regularly patrolled the territory. African lions are the continent's most formidable social predators, with males weighing up to 420 pounds and females around 280 pounds. Their bite force is capable of inflicting catastrophic trauma to the neck and airway. Lions typically hunt at night, using coordinated group tactics and remarkable stealth despite their size. That evening, the operator established camp in an open area with scattered acacia trees. No perimeter fencing was erected. The tents, cheap canvas structures with aluminum poles, were anchored with basic stakes that barely penetrated the hard ground. As darkness fell, the guide built a small fire, but retired to his vehicle parked roughly 40 yards away, where he slept in the locked cab. Elina and 4 other travelers were left in their individual tents with minimal instruction beyond keeping food stored and zippers closed. The temperature that night was oppressive, hovering near 85 degrees Fahrenheit even after sunset. Speculation was that Elina partially unzipped her tent door for ventilation, leaving a gap of approximately 6 to 8 inches. Around midnight, several campers heard vocalizations in the distance, the deep, resonant roars that lions use to communicate across their territory. The guide later told investigators he had called out asking if everyone had sealed their tents. He received no response and fell back asleep. At approximately between 2:30 and 3 a.m., 2 lionesses approached the camp. They had been likely drawn by lingering food odors and human scent from the campsite. The larger female, weighing an estimated 260 to 300 pounds, investigated the perimeter of Elina's tent first. Within seconds, the lioness forced her head through the gap, widening it by pushing against the fabric with her shoulders. The tent material tore with a sharp ripping sound. Elina woke as claws, curved and built for gripping and holding prey, tore through the canvas wall beside her sleeping bag. She managed one piercing scream before the lioness lunged forward, jaws clamping onto her neck and jawline with crushing force. The bite was violent and destabilizing rather than surgically precise. Lions instinctively target the head and neck of prey, using powerful shaking motions to subdue and incapacitate. Elina's scream cut off abruptly as her airway was compromised and she was dragged downward. As the lioness repositioned her grip, the second lioness rushed in from the opposite side of the tent, raking claws across Elina's torso and abdomen, tearing through skin and muscle as the fabric collapsed inward. One traveler, sleeping in the nearest tent 30 feet away, heard the scream followed by frantic tearing sounds and deep, sustained growling. He unzipped his tent flap cautiously, concerned and confused by what was happening, filmed on his phone from a low angle. The recording captured only fleeting silhouettes and blurred motion, providing context for the attack. By starlight and brief movement, the footage could make out the silhouette of a large lioness dragging Elina's body out of the collapsed tent. Her limbs jerked sporadically, consistent with involuntary muscle contractions rather than conscious movement. Blood darkened the ground beneath her, visible as irregular shadows spreading through the grass. The larger lioness maintained her grip near Elina's head and dragged her roughly 10 to 15 yards from the tent into more open ground. Other campers remained frozen in their tents, hearing prolonged growling, snapping, and the sounds of tearing as the lions fed. The noises continued intermittently for 30 to 40 minutes before falling silent. The guide emerged from his vehicle and discovered the scene. He radioed park authorities shortly, with rangers arriving minutes after the call. They found Alina's remains partially consumed, with catastrophic trauma to the neck, chest, and abdominal cavity. The medical examiner's report, filed 3 days later, listed cause of death as massive blood loss and airway compromise due to severe trauma from a predatory attack, with death occurring within several minutes of initial contact. The safari operator was questioned, but faced no immediate charges, despite clear violations of national park regulations. His operation fell under poorly enforced, but clearly illegal practices. His business was quietly shut down 8 months later, following pressure from legitimate tour companies. Alina's body was repatriated to Finland within a week. It was December 11, 2015, and the Zambezi River flowed past Victoria Falls with deceptive tranquility, its muddy waters hiding some of Africa's most dangerous predators beneath their placid surface. Kevin O'Brien had been staying at a backpacker lodge near the falls for 3 days, drinking heavily with other travelers and seeking increasingly dangerous thrills to impress his new friends. The 24-year-old Irish graduate had been traveling through Africa for 2 months, documenting his adventures on social media and constantly pushing the boundaries of acceptable risk. Kevin O'Brien had arrived in Africa fresh from university with a degree in business and a trust fund that allowed him to travel indefinitely without working. His social media accounts were filled with photos of bungee jumping, whitewater rafting, and other extreme activities, each post designed to showcase his fearlessness and adventurous spirit. Kevin's need for validation through dangerous stunts had escalated throughout his trip, with each new activity requiring greater risk to generate the same level of excitement. The backpacker lodge where Kevin was staying catered to young adventure tourists, offering cheap accommodation and easy access to extreme sports activities. The lodge's bar was a gathering place for travelers sharing stories of their exploits and daring each other to attempt increasingly dangerous feats. Kevin had quickly established himself as the most reckless member of the group, often accepting dares that other travelers considered too dangerous. That evening, Kevin had been drinking heavily with a group of fellow backpackers when the conversation turned to swimming in the Zambezi River. Local staff and experienced travelers had warned against entering the water due to the presence of Nile crocodiles, but Kevin dismissed these warnings as exaggerated attempts to control tourist behavior. Nile crocodiles are among the world's most dangerous reptiles, with adult males reaching lengths of 20 feet and weights exceeding 1,500 pounds. These apex predators are perfectly adapted for ambush hunting, capable of remaining motionless for hours while waiting for prey to approach. Their explosive attack speed and bone-crushing bite force make them responsible for hundreds of human deaths annually across Africa. Nile crocodiles are particularly dangerous in areas near tourist activities, as they often associate human presence with easy feeding opportunities. Around dawn, Kevin accepted a dare from other backpackers to swim across a section of the Zambezi known for its crocodile population. Despite warnings from lodge staff and the obvious danger of the murky water, Kevin's alcohol-impaired judgment and need to maintain his reputation for fearlessness overrode his survival instincts. Kevin entered the water at a popular fishing spot where local guides had reported recent crocodile sightings. The river appeared calm and peaceful in the early morning light, but the murky water made it impossible to see more than a few inches below the surface. Kevin began swimming toward the opposite bank, his strokes creating ripples and splashing sounds that carried far through the quiet morning air. A massive Nile crocodile, over 16 feet in length, had been hunting in the area and detected Kevin's movement in the water from several hundred meters away. The ancient predator began approaching with the patience and stealth that had made crocodiles successful hunters for millions of years, remaining completely submerged as it closed the distance to its prey. Kevin was halfway across the river when the crocodile struck, the massive reptile launching itself from the depths with explosive force. The crocodile's jaws clamped down on Kevin's leg with bone-crushing pressure, the impact driving him underwater as the predator began its signature death roll. The crocodile spun rapidly in the water, using its massive weight and powerful tail to disorient Kevin while maintaining its deadly grip. Each rotation caused additional trauma as the reptile's teeth tore through muscle and bone, while the spinning motion made it impossible for Kevin to surface for air. Kevin's screams had alerted other travelers on the riverbank, but no rescue was possible once the crocodile had seized him. The massive reptile dragged Kevin into deeper water, where the death roll continued until his struggles ceased. The entire attack lasted less than 3 minutes, but the crocodile's grip never loosened. The crocodile disappeared beneath the murky water with Kevin's body, carrying its prey toward the deeper pools where it would cache the remains until ready to feed. Kevin's backpack and clothing were found on the riverbank, but his body was never recovered despite extensive search efforts by local authorities. The investigation revealed that Kevin had ignored multiple warnings about crocodile crocodile dangers and had entered the water while intoxicated. His death prompted the lodge to implement stricter security measures and better enforcement of river safety rules. But the tragedy highlighted the deadly consequences of treating African wildlife as entertainment. Kevin's death became a cautionary tale shared among backpacker communities about the importance of respecting local warnings and the deadly reality of African predators. His social media accounts, filled with increasingly dangerous stunts, served as a reminder of how the pursuit of thrills could lead to fatal consequences. It was March 8, 2016, and the sun hung low over the Okavango Delta. Hannah Mulenga adjusted her waterproof camera housing, pressing her thumb along the rubber seal one last time before wading deeper into the murky shallows. The water was tea-dark from tannins, opaque enough that her calves disappeared within inches. Hannah was 27 years old, a photography enthusiast from Lusaka, Zambia, known among local wildlife circles for her fearless approach to documenting animal behavior. She worked part-time for a conservation NGO, producing stills used in school programs and visitor briefings. She favored eye-level shots that placed the viewer inside the animal's space, rather than observing from a distance. Colleagues often joked that Hannah would wade through anything for the perfect frame, a comment delivered half in admiration and half in concern. Over 3 years, she had photographed hippos along rivers and floodplains across southern Africa. That confidence had grown gradually, and to her mind, responsibly. She had never been injured, never charged, never forced to abandon a shoot because of fear. Each successful session reinforced the last. What she had not fully accounted for were the risks posed by other predators that shared those same waterways. Nile crocodiles are among the most formidable predators on the continent. Adults can reach lengths of up to 18 feet and weigh more than 1,600 pounds, with a bite force measured in the thousands of pounds per square inch, capable of crushing bone and tearing muscle with minimal effort. Built for ambush, they can remain motionless for hours. When they strike, they do so with explosive speed, lunging forward in bursts that can reach approximately 22 miles per hour in water. Movement and vibration trigger their prey response. To a crocodile, a wading antelope, a splashing bird, or a human knee-deep in a channel registers the same. That afternoon, Hannah's guide, a local man named Tumalo, had warned her repeatedly about entering the water. He had pointed out specific channels where crocodiles had been seen earlier that morning, noting the slide marks on muddy banks and the faint ripples that suggested submerged bodies. Hannah listened, nodded, and acknowledged his experience. But he said that she maintained that the angle from shore flattened the animals and removed the sense of scale she needed. She told him she had waded before, many times, and knew how to read water for danger signs. Tumelo did not argue further, but he remained uneasy as he watched her step off the bank. From roughly 30 yards away, Tumelo observed Hannah progress deeper into the channel. The water rose from her ankles to her knees, rippling around her legs as she moved slowly to avoid startling the hippos. They were clustered on the far bank, an estimated 50 to 70 feet away, their broad backs breaking the surface in a loose line. The hippos were close enough to dominate the scene visually, but not close enough to deter a crocodile concealed along the reed line where Hannah waded. Another group of hippos lingered farther ahead, half submerged and apparently indifferent to her presence. Hannah stopped, adjusted her stance, and then knelt to stabilize her shot, lowering her center of gravity and bracing her elbows against her thighs. The attack came without warning. There was no visible disturbance beforehand, no ripple or shadow to signal what was beneath her. The surface erupted as the crocodile launched upward, its massive jaws clamping onto Hannah's right thigh with crushing force. The impact knocked her sideways, twisting her torso as she fell. Her camera remained clutched in both hands as her brain struggled to register what had happened. Tumelo heard her scream, a sharp, brief sound that cut across the channel. He ran to the bank, shouting into his radio to alert the camp emergency net, and grabbed a long pole and a throw rope. He edged into the shallows but stopped short when the water exploded again in front of him. Recognizing the danger, he backed away and called for the boat rather than entering the water himself. The crocodile, later estimated at approximately 14 feet in length, immediately employed its signature death roll. Underwater, it spun with violent speed, using rotational force to tear through muscle and compromise bone. Hannah's femur fractured in multiple places, the jagged breaks consistent with torsional stress. Her pelvis dislocated as the animal twisted, its teeth sunk nearly 4 inches into her flesh. Mud and blood clouded the water. She surfaced once, gasping and thrashing, her movements frantic and uncoordinated. It was the only time she broke the surface after the initial strike. Rangers from a nearby anti-poaching patrol, already navigating an adjacent channel less than 3 kilometers away, arrived roughly 12 minutes after Tumelo's call. They brought poles and firearms, spreading out along the bank and scanning the water. By the time they reached the site, there was nothing visible except Hannah's backpack, which had snagged on a cluster of submerged papyrus roots approximately 20 feet from where the attack had occurred. The channel had returned to a deceptive calm, the surface smooth and dark, offering no immediate indication of the violence it had concealed moments earlier. The hippos had shifted position, but remained in the area, their presence lending an unsettling normalcy to the scene. Recovery efforts began immediately, but were complicated by the maze-like network of channels and reed beds that defined the delta. Rangers searched until nightfall and resumed at first light. Hannah's body was located the following morning, partially submerged in reeds roughly 200 yards downstream from the attack site. The coroner's report documented massive trauma to the right leg and pelvis, with fractures and tissue damage consistent with extreme rotational force. The official cause of death was listed as drowning following catastrophic blood loss and shock from the initial attack. In the days that followed, wildlife officials noted an increase in crocodile encounters linked to drought conditions that were pushing animals and people into the same shrinking water sources. Access routes narrowed, and predators accustomed to ambushing wildlife found humans entering areas that had once been avoided. Hannah's camera equipment was recovered and returned to her family in Lusaka. The memory cards were intact, containing images from earlier in the day, quiet frames of water and hippos taken before she entered the channel. It was March 22, 2018, when the humid air of Costa Rica's Corcovado National Park hung heavy with the scent of wet earth and the cries of nocturnal creatures echoing beneath the dense rainforest canopy. Deep on the remote Osa Peninsula, this wilderness is one of the most biodiverse places on Earth, where every sound hides life and every shadow holds motion. Eleanor Briggs, a 28-year-old tourist from San Diego, for what was supposed to be a week of guided eco-adventures. They had joined a small group staying at a remote lodge near the park's northern boundary, where visitors could hike into the primary forest with local guides during daylight hours. The couple had spent the afternoon photographing scarlet macaws, capuchin monkeys, and the winding, root-tangled trails that snaked through the jungle. That evening, after dinner, Eleanor realized she had left her action camera along one of the marked trails where they had filmed earlier. Against Marcus's protests and the lodge owner's warnings, she decided to go back alone to retrieve it before the rain arrived. She insisted it was only a short walk, 15 minutes at most, and took a small LED headlamp and her phone for light. The rainforest at night was suffocatingly dark. Moonlight barely filtered through the canopy, and the rhythmic drone of insects filled the air. Eleanor followed the muddy trail, guided by the narrow white beam of her headlamp. She didn't know that the narrow paths hikers used during the day were also favored by the forest's apex predator, the jaguar. About 40 meters away, a female jaguar, weighing just over 60 kilograms, around 130 pounds, had been patrolling her territory. Her keen hearing caught Eleanor's footsteps and the faint beeping of the phone's flashlight control. The cat crouched low, her dappled coat melting into the shadows. Jaguars are ambush hunters, relying on stealth, patience, and explosive strength. In the dense rainforest, their attacks last seconds, not minutes. Eleanor found her camera half buried near the roots of a fallen tree and sighed with relief. As she brushed off the mud, a low, guttural growl rolled through the darkness behind her. She froze, her pulse hammering. She swung her headlamp toward the sound, but the beam struck only dense leaves and tangled vines. The jungle seemed to hold its breath. Then, from the left, the jaguar struck. In a blur of muscle and speed, the cat leapt from behind the fallen log and slammed into Eleanor's upper body, driving her to the forest floor. Her headlamp flew off, plunging the clearing into blackness. Before she could scream, the jaguar's jaws locked around her neck and lower skull. Its teeth punctured deep into the soft tissues beneath the jawline, severing arteries and crushing part of the upper spine. The force of the bite caused catastrophic hemorrhage and asphyxia within moments. Eleanor's body went still. The jaguar held its grip for nearly a minute, then released and began dragging the body toward the undergrowth to cache its kill. Within minutes, the forest was silent again. When Eleanor didn't return, Marcus and 2 guides set out with flashlights. They found her headlamp near the broken undergrowth but no sign of her. It took local rangers and police until dawn to locate her remains about 200 meters from the trail. The attack was confirmed to be by a wild jaguar, a rare but known occurrence in regions where human activity overlaps with hunting corridors. Costa Rican authorities closed the area for several months to track and relocate the animal. The incident led to stricter visitor guidelines for Corcovado, including mandatory guides after sunset and prohibitions against solo travel beyond lodge boundaries. It was September 3, 2013, near the Toklat River in Denali National Park, Alaska. By early afternoon, the wind had dropped, and the landscape stood still, open and silent. From a distance, it looked calm, a place where nothing could happen quickly, but the quiet there was deceptive. Sarah Miller, 26, was an experienced backpacker from Anchorage. She was known for her minimalist approach, carrying only what she trusted, relying on skill rather than gear. Her plan that week was to complete a 2-day loop near the Toklat River, timed to coincide with caribou migration, following a route where wolves were often observed trailing herds. She carried bear spray, a GPS beacon, and enough food for 2 nights. Solo travel didn't intimidate her. She'd done it for years, often documenting her routes for small hiking blogs. The Denali backcountry zones required permits, which she had properly filed. Rangers later recalled she had asked about late-season wolf movements, but showed no concern when told sightings had increased near the river corridor. Wolves had been following caribou herds migrating south, and fresh tracks had been noted days earlier. To Sarah, it was just part of the environment, one she respected but didn't fear. Wolves in this region averaged between 70 and 100 pounds, built for endurance and speed, capable of covering 40 miles in a day. Their jaws delivered a bite force of nearly 400 pounds per square inch, strong enough to crush bone. They rarely approached people living on caribou, hares, and ground squirrels, but when prey grew scarce, or human scent carried traces of food, curiosity sometimes lingered. That week, rangers had posted advisories near trailheads, noting that several hikers reported wolves trailing them at a distance. Sarah had likely read those postings when she signed out, though no record showed she changed her route. Her confidence in her precautions was understandable. Statistically, Denali's wolves avoided confrontation. At around 4 p.m., a passing tourist group in a vehicle on the park road spotted a lone figure standing on a gravel bar below the ridge. The hiker waved, later confirmed by clothing and timing to be Sarah, before continuing upstream toward the area where her camp was located. She reached her final GPS coordinates sometime before 4:45 p.m. The last photos on her recovered camera showed wide shots of the river valley and a small group of wolves following a caribou herd in the mid-distance. Tracks found later indicated she moved off the main gravel bar toward higher ground, likely planning to cut inland. The first sign of struggle began about half a mile from her tent. Her GPS unit recorded erratic movement, rapid looping, then a sudden stop. Investigators reconstructed what happened next through physical evidence and predator behavior analysis. The wolves had diverted toward her position once the herd passed out of sight. Sarah likely saw them at a distance, as she deployed her bear spray once. Residue was detected on nearby vegetation. Wind readings that afternoon showed a westward shift, causing partial blowback of the spray mist. It worked briefly, driving the wolves about 20 feet back before the cloud dispersed. They began to circle again, emboldened by the fading chemical scent. One flank of the group approached from behind, following her retreat up a shallow embankment. Handprints pressed deep into the soil showed she climbed in haste. Blood marks began at the top of the slope. One wolf had likely lunged first, grabbing her backpack or arm. The straps were torn clean through, consistent with a pulling force rather than a cut. A second wolf joined, aiming lower, its bite breaking the skin along her thigh. She tried to fight back. The spray canister lay spent beside her pack, but the group coordinated, one attacking from the rear, the others darting forward. The ground at the site was churned with soil and hair, suggesting several minutes of movement before she was forced down. Analysis of tissue marks later revealed crushing bites to the neck and shoulder consistent with a killing grip, the kind wolves use to suffocate large prey. Her jacket was shredded, and the torn sleeve recovered 20 feet away still held fragments of skin and fabric. Search efforts began that night, with both ground crews and a helicopter dispatched after rangers noted her vehicle unmoved. The aircraft spotted a disturbed patch of gravel near the Toklat Channel the next morning. Sarah's body lay partially covered by soil and debris, her left arm missing, likely carried off by scavengers after the attack. They collected the camera and other items for analysis, and later confirmed through timestamps that her final photograph was taken just 6 minutes before the estimated time of death. The park temporarily closed multiple backcountry zones along the migration corridor. Genetic sampling confirmed the wolves belonged to the Toklat pack. Investigators determined the attack began as a predatory test, or prey proxy response, that escalated fatally, but with no repeated approach or food-seeking behavior observed. No removals were ordered. At a private debrief, rangers explained the findings to Sarah's parents, who later issued a short statement urging that the park not punish what it protects. It was November 7, 2014, and the afternoon sun hung low over the Chobe River, casting long shadows across the murky water as a tour boat drifted lazily along the eastern edge of Chobe National Park. The air was thick with humidity, carrying the earthy smell of wet vegetation and mud. Alina Petrov was a 41-year-old school administrator from Plovdiv, Bulgaria. Colleagues described her as someone who followed rules and trusted authority figures without question. They said that she had chosen Botswana specifically for its reputation as a safe, well-regulated safari destination. This trip represented more than just vacation for Alina. It was a personal milestone after years of caring for her aging mother, who had passed away 8 months earlier. They said that she had researched tour operators extensively, ultimately selecting one with strong online reviews and what appeared to be comprehensive safety protocols. The Chobe River forms the northern boundary of Chobe National Park, creating a vital water source for some of Africa's largest elephant herds, as well as a dense population of large Nile crocodiles that patrol the banks and channels year-round. Nile crocodiles are among the most efficient ambush predators on Earth. They can lunge from the water with explosive speed, launching several feet vertically and forward in a fraction of a second, and their conical, serrated teeth are designed not to chew but to grip and hold, allowing them to drag prey and perform the devastating death roll that dismembers and drowns victims. The tourboat captain had been operating river tours for 6 years without incident. That afternoon, he knowingly deviated from standard safety briefings by allowing his 8 passengers to trail their hands in the water, claiming the crocodiles in this particular stretch of river were well-fed and uninterested in humans. Several passengers questioned this practice, noting they had been warned at their lodge that morning never to touch the river water. The captain dismissed their concerns with a laugh, framing the warnings as exaggerated rules meant to scare tourists rather than real danger. The water visibility was particularly poor that day due to recent rains upstream, creating ideal hunting conditions for crocodiles, which rely on murky water and low visibility to approach prey unnoticed. Alina, trusting the captain's confidence, was one of 3 passengers who followed his suggestion. She sat with her legs tucked beneath her on the bench seat, leaning slightly over the low wooden railing with her right hand submerged to the wrist. The boat had slowed nearly to a stop so passengers could photograph a herd of elephants on the far bank. One passenger stood near the bow holding a handheld video camera, recording the elephants and the relaxed mood on deck as the boat idled. The attack happened with shocking suddenness. The water beside Alina erupted in a violent upward surge, and a massive crocodile launched from the river with its jaws already open. The footage captured a brief, chaotic glimpse of the impact, the reptile's jaws slamming into Alina's right shoulder and upper chest, the sheer force lifting her partially out of her seat. She had no time to scream before the crocodile's weight pulled her sideways against the railing. For a single frozen moment, Alina's left hand gripped the metal rail, her face contorted in shock and pain as the crocodile's jaws compressed her ribcage. Then the animal rolled backward into the water, and she went over the side. The splash sent sheets of spray across the boat, drenching the passengers closest to her. Witnesses on the boat heard screams and shouted warnings, along with the captain's panicked curses. Alina resurfaced approximately 10 to 15 feet from the boat. Blood poured from massive wounds on her chest and shoulder, spreading rapidly across the water's surface. Her left arm flailed weakly as she tried to stay afloat. Then the crocodile surfaced behind her, its massive jaws opening wide before clamping onto her upper back. The force drove her under instantly. The water churned violently for several seconds, foam and blood mixing as the crocodile performed a powerful death roll designed to disorient and drown its prey. Then, with horrifying abruptness, the turbulence stopped. The water settled into widening ripples. leaving only a drifting cloud of red. The captain radioed park authorities, his voice shaking so badly that rangers initially struggled to understand him. Armed rangers arrived approximately 35 minutes later from the nearest river station, finding the tour boat anchored several hundred yards downstream, its passengers huddled in the center deck, some weeping, others sitting in stunned silence. Alina's body was recovered the following afternoon, snagged on submerged roots nearly 3 miles downstream, a distance attributed to strong river currents and post-flood conditions. The coroner's report, issued 3 days later, noted massive trauma to the chest and spine consistent with Nile crocodile predation, with death likely occurring within minutes of submersion due to catastrophic blood loss and drowning. Park officials identified the responsible crocodile as a large male measuring approximately 16 feet in length, an unusually large but well-documented size for the region, believed to have been displaced from its usual territory by seasonal flooding. The boat captain was suspended pending investigation, with authorities later stating that no criminal prosecution was filed. It was May 21, 2018, in Gran Paradiso National Park, northern Italy. The small expedition of 4 had finished dinner beside a dying fire, leaving one storage bag unsealed near the cooking area. Giovanni Russo, 38, had worked these slopes for over a decade. A certified alpine guide, he and his wife, Elena, led small trekking tours for tourists seeking an authentic mountain night. Giovanni was regarded by peers as practical and even-tempered, someone who knew when to turn back and when to press on. He'd grown up in Aosta and spent most of his adult life navigating the same valleys where his father once herded sheep. The Gran Paradiso region had become a renewed focal point for conservation. Wolves had returned after decades of absence, a fact Giovanni respected but didn't fear. He saw himself as part of that balance between humans and wildlife. The couple's guiding company specialized in remote routes with minimal disturbance, and Giovanni often told clients that predators avoided people. The trek that weekend was routine, a mild ascent, and one night at a designated campsite near the meadow of Alpmoney. His clients, a pair of mid-aged hikers from Milan, had little experience in backcountry settings but trusted the couple completely. That night, one of them had left a pack of trail mix open near the fire pit, and scraps from dinner were tossed into the same area. Wolves in this region averaged between 60 and 70 pounds, with lean gray coats blending into the forest. Normally nocturnal, they hunted red deer and chamois, working in coordinated packs. But in recent years, rangers had observed bolder juveniles venturing closer to human camps, especially when food waste was left accessible. Just before dawn, around 4 a.m., Elena woke to soft rustling, first near the cooking area, then a faint growl, low and uncertain. She thought it was a fox at first, until she saw several silhouettes clustered around the fire pit, where the unsealed food bag now lay torn open. She whispered for Giovanni, who unzipped his sleeping bag and grabbed his flashlight. He stepped outside alone, the cold air hitting his face as he walked 10, maybe 50 feet toward the food zone. The beam of his flashlight caught 3 wolves standing over scattered wrappers and crumbs. He shouted and waved his light, but they didn't scatter. One stepped forward, hackles raised, its paws firm on the ground. Giovanni shouted again, clapping his hands. When he took another step forward, closing distance, the older female lunged, nipping at his forearm in a defensive snap. Giovanni jerked back, but the young one followed through, clamping down near his elbow. The bite struck deep, severing tissue near the carotid and vertebral area when he twisted to pull free, a rare but catastrophic injury. He fell backward, blood pulsed through his injuries. The wolves held their ground, uncertain now, circling the dropped food bag. Elena tore from the tent with a burning stick from the fire pit. The clients, frozen inside their shelter, saw Giovanni collapsed on the ground, blood pooling around his collar. Elena screamed and swung the torch, striking one of the juveniles across the flank. It yelped and retreated into the dark. The rest scattered after a final low growl, vanishing toward the tree line. She knelt beside him, pressing her hands to the wound, whispering his name over and over. Giovanni's chest moved once more, then stopped. Because of the poor signal at that altitude, one client climbed several meters up a nearby slope to reach coverage, successfully contacting park emergency services. Rangers arrived at the campsite just before sunrise. Giovanni's body remained where it had fallen, partially covered by his wife's jacket. His face was intact, but the left side of his neck showed deep, crushing injuries. Investigators later determined the fatal wound likely occurred as Giovanni twisted while the wolf held his arm, a freak tear along the artery that caused near-instant collapse. Officials ruled the incident as a food-provoked escalation involving juveniles, noting that the wolves had been feeding near unsecured rations. A short-term monitoring and deterrence program followed, but no culling was ordered, as the pack showed no further boldness toward humans. Giovanni's funeral was held 5 days later in Aosta. It was July 14, 2018, the winter sun hanging low over the Free State grasslands of South Africa, when Leonid Baran made the fatal mistake of transforming himself from part of a large, non-threatening vehicle into a separate, vulnerable target in the eyes of a protective mother. The 18-year-old exchange student had arrived in South Africa just 6 weeks earlier as part of a summer exchange program through his community college in Riverside, California. He had enrolled in the program impulsively, encouraged by friends and family who saw it as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity before transferring to a 4-year school. His host family described him as enthusiastic and impulsive, the kind of young man who acted before thinking but without malicious intent. This safari, organized through his exchange program, was meant to be the highlight of his stay abroad, a chance to see Africa's famous wildlife up close before returning home at the end of summer. The open-sided Land Rover had stopped on a dirt road cutting through knee-high grass speckled with acacia shrubs. The vehicle was one of several used by the lodge, modified with raised seats and metal side panels designed to provide a physical barrier between tourists and wildlife. There were no doors, only open gaps above the panels, and guests were expected to remain seated with their bodies fully inside the frame at all times. The road itself was little more than a pair of worn tracks pressed into the soil by years of safari traffic, bordered closely by brush that could easily conceal large animals. Earlier that morning, the guide had delivered the standard safety briefing at the lodge. He emphasized that guests must remain seated at all times and never extend arms or legs outside the vehicle. He explained that predators often interpreted sudden movement as a threat or opportunity, and that the vehicle's silhouette provided protection by making humans appear as part of a single, large, non-prey object. He specifically warned that lions with cubs were active in this sector of the reserve and were known to be highly defensive. African lionesses are the primary hunters of a pride, weighing roughly 260 to 400 pounds and capable of killing prey several times their own size. Their bite force, estimated around 650 pounds per square inch, is sufficient to crush vertebrae or collapse a windpipe. Highly defensive of cubs, maternal lionesses are among Africa's most unpredictable and dangerous animals. They can sprint up to about 35 miles per hour over short distances, covering ground far faster than a human can react, and attacks often occur with little to no visible warning. Critically, lions rely heavily on visual cues to assess threats, identifying potential dangers by size, movement patterns, and silhouette recognition. When the vehicle rounded a gentle bend and the guide spotted 3 lion cubs playing near a roadside bush approximately 20 feet away, he immediately cut the engine. He raised one hand and quietly instructed everyone to remain still and quiet. The cubs, probably around 4 months old and still displaying the faint spotted coats of youth, rolled and pounced on each other in the dappled shade. Their presence suggested that the mother was nearby, likely resting in thicker cover just out of sight, watching the large green vehicle that her instincts registered as a single, non-threatening object. For several minutes, the tourist took photographs, whispering excitedly as camera shutters clicked. Then Leonid reached into his day pack to swap his camera lens, his movements becoming hurried and expansive. The guide noticed and told him firmly to remain still, but Leonid, distracted by the cub's proximity, shifted his weight to the very edge of his seat. What happened next was a direct result of a fundamental failure in silhouette discipline. As Leonid leaned out, his upper torso and camera lens broke the vertical plane of the vehicle's side panel. To the lioness, a piece of the large neutral object had suddenly detached and moved independently, transforming from a passive environmental feature into a mobile biological threat. The lioness had been monitoring the vehicle from dense cover roughly 30 feet away, her eyes tracking its movements while remaining motionless. Safari vehicles were familiar to her. They appeared regularly on this route, maintaining their shape and distance before moving on. But when Leonid's upper body broke free from the vehicle's outline, her visual processing system registered an immediate threat assessment change. What had been one large stationary object was now a large object with a smaller mobile component advancing toward her offspring. Leonid leaned out farther, extending his arm as he tried to get a closer photograph of the cubs. At that moment, he was less than 8 feet from the nearest cub, his body clearly separated from the vehicle's protective silhouette. The lioness's defensive instincts triggered instantly. The lioness emerged from the brush behind the cubs with almost no visible warning. Witnesses later said they did not see her until she was already in motion. She covered the distance to the vehicle in under 2 seconds. Leonid was still extended over the side, his camera raised, when the lioness struck him with the full force of her roughly 330-pound frame. Leonid's torso was driven backward against the metal edge of the vehicle, and then yanked forward as the lioness's jaws clamped onto his ribcage and shoulder. Her canines punctured through his shirt and skin, sinking deep into the muscle beneath. The dashcam mounted near the front of the Land Rover later captured the attack in grainy detail. The lioness braced against the vehicle, jaws locked around Leonid's upper body, pulling him over the side panel toward the ground. Leonid's legs kicked frantically as he was dragged, his body scraping over the metal edge before disappearing into the grass beside the road. Tourists screamed, their voices overlapping in panic on the audio recording. The lioness never released her grip, using her body weight and neck muscles to overpower him. Leonid's right hand came up weakly, pushing against her muzzle, but the pressure of her bite had already collapsed part of his ribcage. Blood spread rapidly across his chest and neck, soaking through his shirt in dark, irregular patches. The lioness adjusted her grip, releasing momentarily before clamping down again on Leonid's throat and upper chest. This second bite crushed his trachea and severed the carotid artery. His legs stopped moving almost immediately. Witnesses estimated the main attack sequence lasted under a minute from initial contact to the cessation of movement. The lioness began dragging his body toward heavier brush, the cubs scattering into the grass as she moved. After perhaps 10 feet, she released him and retreated quickly, responding to the sound of the engine as the guide restarted the vehicle and repositioned it to create distance. The guide radioed the park ranger station immediately, his voice strained but controlled as he reported a fatal mauling. Rangers from the nearest post arrived 14 minutes later, armed and prepared to tranquilize or, if necessary, shoot the lioness. She was no longer visible, having moved deeper into cover with her cubs. Leonid lay in the grass about 15 feet from the road, his body motionless. Rangers confirmed there was no pulse and extensive visible trauma to the chest and throat. The coroner's report later documented that death resulted from rapid exsanguination and asphyxiation due to massive bite trauma. The remaining tourists were escorted back to the lodge in silence. Statements were taken, dashcam footage was secured, and Leonid's belongings were collected from the vehicle. His family was notified later that day through the U.S. Embassy. The lioness and her cubs were monitored in the following weeks, but were not relocated or destroyed. Officials concluded that she had responded naturally to a perceived threat to her young, and that the incident was the result of clear safety violations. It was September 3, 2017, when the crisp autumn air of Yellowstone National Park carried the scent of pine and approaching winter through Wyoming's rugged wilderness. The vast expanse of America's first national park stretched endlessly, with towering mountains, dense forests, and pristine meadows creating a photographer's paradise. Warren Douglas, a 45-year-old wilderness photographer from Denver, Colorado, had arrived at Slough Creek Campground for what he planned as his most ambitious solo expedition yet. A divorced father of 2 teenage daughters, Warren possessed extensive military survival training from his Army days and had spent 15 years capturing award-winning wildlife images across North America's most remote locations. His weathered hands and keen eyes reflected years of calculated risks in pursuit of that perfect shot. Warren's reputation among wildlife photographers was built on his ability to read animal behavior and maintain safe distances while capturing intimate moments of predator life. He had been tracking a massive male grizzly for 2 days, hoping to document the bear's natural feeding behavior during the crucial pre-hibernation period. His military background had instilled confidence in his survival abilities, making him comfortable venturing alone into territories where most photographers required guides and backup support. Warren's daughters often worried about his solo expeditions, but his track record of successful wilderness photography had earned their reluctant acceptance of his dangerous profession. Grizzly bears are among North America's most formidable predators, with adult males weighing up to 800 pounds and possessing strength capable of breaking tree trunks. Their 4-inch claws can shred thin sheet metal and inflict devastating wounds, while their powerful jaws deliver bite forces exceeding 1,200 pounds per square inch. These apex predators can reach speeds of 35 miles per hour despite their massive size, and their acute sense of smell surpasses that of bloodhounds by 7 times. During autumn, grizzlies enter hyperphagia, consuming up to 20,000 calories daily to prepare for winter hibernation, making them extremely aggressive when defending food sources. Their territorial nature becomes particularly pronounced when protecting kills from scavengers and perceived threats. On his third morning, Warren discovered the 600-pound boar feeding on a fresh elk carcass in a meadow near Slough Creek. The massive bear's chocolate-brown fur rippled with muscle as it tore chunks of meat from the carcass with methodical precision. Warren initially positioned himself 150 yards away behind a fallen log, capturing several shots through his telephoto lens. The bear remained focused on feeding, occasionally lifting its enormous head to scan the surroundings before returning to its meal. Driven by the desire for more dramatic close-up images, Warren began advancing using available cover. At 100 yards, he crouched behind a large boulder, continuing to photograph the feeding bear. The grizzly showed no signs of agitation, encouraging Warren to move closer. He repositioned himself behind a cluster of pine trees at 75 yards from the massive predator, believing his military stealth training would keep him undetected. This distance violated park regulations requiring a 100-yard minimum separation from bears. The wind suddenly shifted direction, carrying Warren's human scent directly toward the feeding bear. The grizzly had likely detected his presence much earlier, but tolerated it while focused on feeding. The scent change triggered an immediate alarm. The grizzly's massive head snapped upward, nostrils flaring as it processed the threat. The bear rose onto its hind legs, reaching nearly 9 feet in height, scanning methodically for the source of the intrusion. Its ears pinned back against its skull while its shoulder muscles visibly tensed beneath its thick fur. Warren remained motionless, hoping the bear would return to feeding. Instead, the grizzly dropped to all fours and began moving deliberately in his direction, following the scent trail with predatory focus. At 50 yards, the bear spotted Warren behind the trees. The grizzly immediately charged, covering the distance in less than 4 seconds. Warren fumbled desperately for his bear spray, but the safety clip jammed in his panic. The 600-pound predator struck him with tremendous force, its massive forepaws slamming into his chest and abdomen. The impact launched Warren backward into a tree trunk with bone-crushing force. The grizzly followed immediately with devastating bites to Warren's scalp, face, and shoulders, its powerful jaws crushing bone and tearing flesh while causing massive bleeding. The bear then began brief mauling behavior, using its 4-inch claws to rake Warren's torso. Warren's ribcage fractured under the assault, puncturing his left lung. The grizzly's claws penetrated his abdominal cavity, causing massive internal bleeding and organ damage. Warren lost consciousness within 30 seconds due to blood loss and traumatic brain injury. The attack lasted approximately 60 seconds before the bear, satisfied that the threat was eliminated, returned to its elk carcass. Park officials reinforced existing safety protocols and increased educational outreach about maintaining proper distances from wildlife following the incident. It was August 14, 2016, and the Mara River churned with thousands of wildebeest bodies as the Great Migration reached its violent crescendo. The air hung thick with dust and the bellowing of desperate animals, while beneath the brown water, ancient predators waited with patience. 9-year-old Tobias Mwangi was the only child of Daniel and Ruth Mwangi, both mid-level government clerks. The boy was small for his age, barely 70 pounds, with thick-framed glasses. His teachers at a Nairobi primary school described him as unusually quiet. The family had hired 26-year-old guide Japheth Ola Kiroti in only his second season, eager to impress and secure 5-star reviews. He promised Daniel secret viewing spots beyond other tourists' reach and drove the Mwangi's Land Cruiser off designated roads, down a narrow track to a river bend where wildebeest slowed under a predator's watch. Nile crocodiles can grow up to 18 feet long and weigh over 1,600 pounds, with a bite force among the strongest of any animal on Earth. During migration season, these reptiles gather in concentration, sometimes 20 or more in a single river bend, lying motionless in murky water, with only their eyes and nostrils visible. They can remain submerged for up to 2 hours, then explode upward with shocking speed to seize prey and drag it underwater, a hunting method that has remained unchanged for millions of years. The river crossing that morning was particularly chaotic. Heavy rains upstream had raised the water level and strengthened the current, forcing the wildebeest into tighter crossing points. Other tour vehicles remained parked on the elevated viewing plateau, 150 yards back, their guides recognizing the heightened danger. But Japheth had maneuvered the Land Cruiser down to a flat area, just 15 feet from the churning water, telling the Mwangis this was the best photography angle in the entire Mara. Daniel had expressed concern about the proximity, but Japheth assured him it was perfectly safe. After all, the crocodiles were focused on the wildebeest. Tobias had climbed onto the vehicle's roof rack designed to hold luggage and light equipment, not passengers for a better view, camera clutched in both hands. Ruth held his legs to steady him, while Daniel filmed with their video camera. Several wildebeest, panicked by the current and the snapping jaws in the water, had veered from the main crossing and were now thrashing through the shallows directly in front of the Mwangis's position. The noise was tremendous. Splashing, bellowing, the crack of colliding bodies. In the chaos, Tobias leaned forward for a closer shot. The roof rack, already weakened by rust that Japheth had failed to notice during his cursory vehicle inspection, gave way with a sharp metallic snap. Tobias pitched forward, his mother's grip on his legs slipping after a sudden jolt from a wildebeest bumping the vehicle and a surge of water against the tires as the metal collapsed. He fell 8 feet, landing in knee-deep water at the river's edge, directly in the path of the fleeing wildebeest. For perhaps 3 seconds, Tobias was visible in the shallows, struggling to stand in the muddy bottom, his glasses knocked from his face. Ruth screamed and lunged from the vehicle. Daniel ran toward his son, the camera still running. Japheth froze for a moment, hesitating with the radio in his hands before fumbling it and shouting incoherently. The crocodile struck from less than 10 feet away, its camouflage perfect against the mud-brown water. The animal was later estimated at 14 feet long, likely weighing close to 1,200 pounds. It moved with explosive speed, its massive jaws closing around Tobias's torso, compressing his chest with catastrophic force and forcing the air from his lungs. The boy made no sound as shock and compression robbed him of breath, and the crocodile's momentum carried them both backward into deeper water. Ruth had entered the river up to her thighs when Daniel grabbed her, physically dragging her back. Japheth was now out of the vehicle, shouting into his radio. Beneath the surface, the crocodile began a violent rolling motion used to disable and dismember prey. In the opaque water, the struggle was likely brief, Tobias's small body unable to withstand the combined trauma and loss of air. Death occurred within moments as the animal submerged him completely. Japheth's distress call reached the main ranger station. 2 ranger vehicles and a wildlife service rapid response team arrived within minutes. By then, there was nothing to attempt but body recovery. Ruth had collapsed and required sedation. A dive team located Tobias's remains 3 hours later, wedged beneath a submerged log 80 yards downstream. The recovery report noted massive trauma to the chest and abdomen, consistent with crocodile predation, with several ribs completely crushed and the left arm severed. The medical examiner's report stated that death was likely instantaneous, or within seconds, due to severe thoracic trauma followed by rapid drowning. Japheth lost his guide license and faced criminal negligence charges for operating off designated roads and positioning clients in a known danger zone. Ruth required psychiatric hospitalization for acute trauma and never returned to work. It was April 3rd, 2014, and the dense bushveld of Kruger National Park provided perfect cover for the predators that ruled this ancient ecosystem. Elena Rodriguez had been tracking a female leopard for 3 days, following the elusive cat through terrain that few tourists ever experienced. The Spanish photographer had finally located her quarry, resting in a massive marula tree with her 2 young cubs, presenting the exact opportunity she had been hired to capture. Elena Rodriguez had built her reputation photographing wildlife in the mountains of Spain, but African assignments represented a significant step up in both prestige and danger. At 27, she was determined to establish herself as a serious wildlife photographer, taking on increasingly challenging assignments that other photographers avoided. The Nature magazine that had commissioned her leopard photos was paying well, but they expected images that would stand out from the thousands of generic safari shots flooding the market. Elena had been working alone for most of her 3-week assignment, believing that solo work allowed her to get closer to animals without the noise and distraction of guides or other photographers. Her experience with European wildlife had given her confidence, but nothing had prepared her for the territorial aggression and protective instincts of African predators defending their young. That afternoon, Elena had positioned herself about 50 meters from the tree where the leopard family was resting, using a telephoto lens to capture images of the cubs playing while their mother watched vigilantly. The shots were good, but Elena knew they lacked the dramatic impact that would make them magazine-worthy. Leopards are solitary, territorial predators known for their incredible climbing ability and fierce protection of their young. Adult females typically weigh between 60 and 130 pounds, but possess strength far exceeding their size, capable of dragging prey twice their weight up into trees. Mother leopards with cubs are particularly dangerous, as they will attack any perceived threat to their offspring with devastating ferocity. Elena noticed a large sausage tree about 30 meters from the leopard's resting spot that would provide an elevated angle for more dramatic shots. The tree's thick branches and sturdy trunk made it appear safe to climb, and Elena reasoned that the height advantage would allow her to capture unique images while maintaining a respectful distance from the leopard family. What Elena failed to realize was that her chosen tree was positioned directly above the leopard's primary escape route, the path the mother would use to move her cubs to safety if threatened. By climbing the tree, Elena had unknowingly blocked the leopard's exit strategy and positioned herself as a direct threat to the family's security. As Elena reached a height of about 15 feet and began setting up her camera equipment, the mother leopard's behavior changed dramatically. The cat's ears flattened against her head, and she began making low, growling sounds while positioning herself between her cubs and Elena's location. The leopard's attack came without further warning, the powerful cat launching herself from her resting branch with explosive force. The mother leopard covered the distance to Elena's tree in seconds, her claws finding purchase on the bark as she climbed toward the perceived threat. The leopard struck Elena with devastating force, her powerful claws raking across the photographer's back and shoulders, while her jaws clamped down on Elena's neck and head. The impact of the attack caused Elena to lose her grip on the tree, and both she and the leopard fell toward the ground in a tangle of claws, teeth, and camera equipment. Elena hit the ground hard, her camera gear scattering across the rocky soil as the leopard continued her attack. The cat's maternal instincts drove her to eliminate the threat completely, her powerful jaws inflicting massive trauma to Elena's head and neck, while her claws opened deep wounds across her torso and limbs. Elena's struggles grew weaker as blood loss and trauma overwhelmed her system, her body unable to withstand the leopard's relentless assault. The remote location meant that no help was available, and Elena died from her injuries within minutes of the initial attack. Elena's body was discovered 2 days later by park rangers who had been alerted when she failed to check in at her scheduled time. Her camera equipment was found scattered around the attack site, with her final images showing the leopard's increasing agitation before the fatal encounter. The investigation revealed that Elena had violated park regulations by working alone in dangerous areas and approaching too close to wildlife with young. Her death prompted stricter enforcement of safety protocols for photographers working in national parks and highlighted the extreme dangers posed by protective mother leopards. Elena's tragic death served as a reminder that even experienced wildlife photographers could fall victim to the unpredictable nature of African predators, particularly when maternal instincts were involved. Her story became a cautionary tale shared among wildlife photographers about the importance of understanding animal behavior and maintaining safe distances. It was September 12, 2015, the late afternoon sun casting amber light across the reeds of the Okavango Delta. At the helm of a small aluminum motorboat, Cabello, a 19-year-old guide in training, eased the bow away from the main channel and toward a thin break in the papyrus. Cabello had grown up in Maun, the dusty gateway town on the southern edge of the delta, where tourism underpinned nearly every household. His father worked maintenance at a mid-range lodge, repairing generators and patching walkways between guest tents. His mother sold hand-woven baskets and carved animals at a roadside stall, frequented by tour vans. From a young age, Cabello had watched safari guides move easily between worlds, fluent in English and Setswana, confident on the water, respected by both lodge managers and visitors. The job promised something rare in Maun: stability, tips paid in foreign currency, and a future that did not depend entirely on seasonal labor. After finishing secondary school, Cabello secured an apprenticeship with a budget motorboat operation that catered primarily to backpackers and gap-year travelers. The company ran on thin margins and thinner oversight. Boats were turned around quickly, maintenance was reactive rather than scheduled, and junior staff were promoted to solo runs as soon as they demonstrated basic competence. Cabello received a short orientation, shadowed a senior guide for a handful of trips, and was soon entrusted with his own excursions. There was no formal certification process, and no written examination on wildlife behavior beyond general warnings delivered during morning briefings. In just 3 months, Cabello learned the main arteries of the delta well enough to move between camps without incident. He could read surface currents, avoid visible sandbanks, and manage the temperamental outboard motor with passable confidence. What he lacked was a deeper understanding of hippo territorial behavior and seasonal movement patterns, knowledge typically acquired over years, often through close calls and hard-earned caution. This particular trip was meant to be uncomplicated, a late-afternoon sunset photography excursion with a single German tourist out along the main channel and back before dusk. The guest had requested water-level shots and reed-line reflections, nothing out of the ordinary. Hippopotamuses are estimated to cause several hundred human deaths in Africa each year, making them among the continent's deadliest large animals. Bull hippos, especially solitary males, are aggressively territorial, defending stretches of water they use for resting and access routes to grazing areas. During the dry season, when water levels drop and channels constrict, these territories overlap, and tensions increase. An adult male can weigh up to 4,000 pounds, and despite its size, can sprint short distances on land at speeds approaching 20 miles per hour. Its jaws can open to nearly 150 degrees, exposing thick, curved canines that can reach approximately 18 inches in length. The bite force generated when those jaws close is sufficient to crush bone, shear through aluminum, and split small boats. The channel Cabello chose was barely 15 feet wide at its widest point, hemmed in by papyrus reeds that rose well above head height. Earlier that morning, during the operation's informal safety briefing, a senior guide had specifically mentioned increased hippo activity in side channels due to dropping water levels. Several routes were identified as off-limits until the next flood cycle. According to later statements, Cabello had nodded along with the others, saying nothing. When the boat entered the narrow cut that afternoon, the tourist passenger recalled Cabello mentioning that they were taking a faster way back to camp, adding casually that he knew the area well. What the passenger did not know was that Cabello had navigated this particular channel only once before, months earlier during high water, when depth and visibility made it marginally safer. At that time of year, the reeds sat lower in the water and hippos tended to remain in broader lagoons. In September, conditions were very different. Local fishermen avoided the channel entirely during the dry season, a practice passed down and widely understood among experienced guides. It was not written on any map, but it was common knowledge. By around 4 p.m., the small motorboat idled into the reed corridor, its engine note dull and muted by the vegetation. The main channel lay less than 200 yards to the west, open, sunlit, and carrying the distant sound of other boats. The shortcut promised to save perhaps 10 minutes. Cabello was already behind schedule after a late departure, and the light was beginning to soften toward evening. As the reeds closed in, visibility dropped to under 6 feet. The water darkened with disturbed sediment, opaque and unreadable. The tourist raised his camera, pleased by the sense of immersion, unaware that they had entered the most dangerous terrain possible for a hippo encounter. Moments later, the boat's propeller struck submerged vegetation with a grinding vibration that shuddered through the hull. Cabello immediately cut the throttle. The engine sputtered and fell silent. No kill switch lanyard had been clipped to his wrist, and neither he nor the passenger wore life jackets, omissions that investigators would later cite as basic safety failures. Cabello stood at the stern, leaning over the transom to inspect the motor and clear the fouled propeller. The boat drifted, nearly motionless. The water beside the hull bulged upward without warning. A bull hippo surfaced with explosive force, its massive head breaking through the surface just 3 feet from the aluminum side. Water sheeted off its skin as it exhaled sharply. The animal targeted the source of the mechanical vibration, striking the outboard motor at the stern with a massive upward lunge. The impact shattered the engine's lower unit and pitched the hull sharply to starboard. The impact produced a loud metallic boom that echoed down the channel and sent a shock through the hull. According to the tourist's later account, the sudden lurch threw Cabello off balance and pitched him partially over the gunwale, his lower body plunging into the water, while his upper torso remained caught against the stern. He reached for the motor mount, which was now slick with a mixture of river water and leaking hydraulic fluid from the shattered engine, and failed to secure a grip. The hippo surged again, registering the splashing legs in the water as a direct territorial intrusion. Its jaws opened wide as it lunged upward. The canines closed around Cabello's pelvis, while he was still half submerged, half trapped against the boat. His scream was audible above the reeds, short and abrupt. The force of the jaws functioned like a hydraulic press, fracturing bone and rupturing internal organs. Witness statements indicated that Cabello lost voluntary movement within seconds, his body going slack almost immediately. The tourist remained in the bow, shouting repeatedly for help, his voice carrying but unanswered in the isolated channel. The hippo dragged Cabello beneath the surface with a powerful downward motion. For several seconds, the water boiled and churned, reeds snapping and bending outward. Cabello's head briefly broke the surface, pressed against the animal's jaw, his eyes unfocused and his limbs unresponsive, consistent with rapid loss of consciousness. The hippo submerged again, pulling him under. When they surfaced a final time, there was no visible movement. The tourist managed to restart the engine and maneuver the damaged boat back toward the main channel, then onto the muddy shoreline. He ran along the bank, shouting and waving, until staff from a nearby camp responded and launched a boat. They reached the site approximately 23 minutes later. Cabello's body was recovered downstream, wedged against a fallen tree where the current had slowed. The injuries were catastrophic. Identification was made through his clothing and the operator's passenger manifest. The coroner's report documented massive pelvic disintegration, bilateral femur fractures, extensive soft tissue destruction across the lower abdomen and thighs, and water inhalation. Death was attributed to crushing trauma, followed by fatal blood loss and drowning. The safari operator's license was suspended pending a formal investigation. Findings cited inadequate staff training, failure to enforce route restrictions, and lax safety protocols. The channel was later marked as restricted during low water periods, though enforcement remained inconsistent across operators. Cabello's family received a modest settlement that covered little more than funeral expenses. Within 6 months, another guide in training was hired to fill his position. It was April 3, 2017, in Thoiry, France. Inside the Thoiry Zoo Safari Park, the wolf sector adjacent to the bison paddock, meant to mimic the wild stillness of Yellowstone, seemed calm. Yet within the shadows of its pines, something alive and waiting stirred, a quiet rhythm of movement that would soon break that silence for good. Camille Morel was 29, a fitness instructor from Versailles who lived by routine. Known among her clients for her precision and self-discipline, she maintained the same training schedule no matter where she was. After 6 months of non-stop classes at her studio, she decided to spend a weekend at the Thoiry Zoo Safari, one of the few places near Paris offering guests an overnight wilderness immersion without leaving the country. It wasn't her first visit. She'd stayed once before and remembered the tranquility of waking to animal sounds instead of traffic. She booked the chalet not just for rest, but to keep her running habit intact in the open air. To friends, Camille's decision made sense. The park's trails and guest roads were well marked and safe during visiting hours. She'd read the safety pamphlet about restricted areas, and believed her familiarity with the grounds made her cautious enough. Her chalet overlooked the fenced wolf sector adjacent to the bison range, a layout designed to reduce mixed-species stress and liability during guest drives. The animals were separated by natural barriers and double-fenced zones, and guests were told the viewing area was completely secure. Camille trusted the system. Her goal that morning was simple, a quick 2-mile jog before breakfast, the same as she did every morning at home. The zoo's landscape was a strange fusion of natural calm and controlled wilderness, pine trees in neat clusters, sandy trails, and an artificial stream running through the lowlands. At dawn, the service road and the inner track appeared nearly identical, a known issue in drive-through parks, where early light flattens contrast. Beyond the chalet's edge stretched a gravel service road used by rangers and tour jeeps. The wolves' territory extended across nearly 20 acres of wooded ground. Gray wolves, the largest of the canids, can weigh over 100 pounds and run up to 35 miles per hour for short bursts. Pack behavior revolves around cooperation and hierarchy. Most attacks on humans occur only when the animals feel threatened, cornered, or see unusual movement that triggers pursuit. In captivity, stress or broken boundaries can alter those instincts. That morning, a scheduled maintenance check had delayed some of the park's early operations. Workers had opened an internal service gate near the chalet to move a small utility vehicle through. Overnight frost had iced the latch mechanism, preventing full engagement of the double lock. And when one of the workers received a call about a mechanical issue elsewhere, he left under maintenance override without confirming it was secure. The gate's interlock was meant to be re-engaged once staff passed, a step that failed. Around 7 a.m., Camille stepped outside with her phone and a small water bottle. She jogged down the gravel path that bordered the guest area. Seeing no posted warning signs from that angle, she assumed it looped safely back toward the perimeter trail. By 7:20, she was nearly half a mile in. The road dipped slightly, flanked by pine trunks and open brush. It was then that she unknowingly crossed into the wolf enclosure. The wolves had been fed the previous evening but remained alert and active after a cold night. 3 of them, the dominant male and 2 subordinates, were near the northern edge, restless from the scent of human movement. From the observation tower overlooking part of the enclosure, a zookeeper scanning the area noticed the lone jogger and radioed for confirmation that the route was clear. Seconds later, he realized she was inside the enclosure. He shouted into the radio for a patrol, but before the words were answered, movement broke the calm below. At first, the wolves didn't charge. They emerged from the trees, low to the ground, tails stiff, heads aligned. Camille slowed, confused by their presence but not immediately panicked. She'd seen them before behind fences and thought the barrier must be nearby. When they began advancing in a slow, deliberate arc, the shift in posture made her freeze. She turned, saw the empty stretch of gravel behind her, and started jogging back, faster this time. The wolves matched her pace, then accelerated, paws thudding against the dirt. She broke into a sprint. The zookeeper watching from above saw Camille glance back once to the wolves. Near a drainage trench, her foot caught on the uneven gravel, and she fell forward, hitting hard. Before she could push herself up, the lead wolf clamped down on her right thigh, pulling backward with a violent jerk. She twisted, trying to kick free, but another wolf lunged at her shoulder. Her scream carried across the enclosure, high and ragged. The zookeeper in the tower sounded the alarm and radioed the rangers. The response vehicle was rerouted around the inner fence lines, delaying arrival to just under 10 minutes, within normal range for a keeper-initiated emergency call. 2 more wolves joined, surrounding her as she tried to crawl toward the ditch. The lead wolf released and regripped higher, its teeth sinking into her hip. She struck out with her hands, scraping the gravel, trying to push herself forward, but one of the animals bit into her arm, shaking until it tore free. Within moments, she was on her back, thrashing as the pack pulled from opposite sides. She kicked weakly once more, then went still. Rangers arrived within 10 minutes in a vehicle. They found the wolves clustered over Camille's body, heads low and jaws working. Warning shots sent the pack scattering into the trees. 2 rangers approached as another called for a tranquilizer team. Camille lay on her side, clothing torn, deep bites from shoulder to thigh. 1 ranger checked for a pulse and found none. They covered her with a thermal blanket and secured the area until all 5 wolves were sedated. An autopsy confirmed death by exsanguination, massive blood loss due to multiple deep lacerations and crushing trauma to the limbs. The body was transported under escort to Versailles that afternoon. Camille's family filed a civil lawsuit against the Thoiry Zoo Safari and its parent company, alleging gross negligence and breach of safety protocol. After a year of investigation and hearings, the court ruled in favor of the family. The park quietly settled without appeal. Following the incident, a criminal negligence inquiry and an independent enclosure audit were conducted. Thoiry Zoo Safari implemented procedural retrofits, installing interlocks and alarms that trigger if any gate remains unlatched for more than 15 seconds. It was May 22, 2018. The acacia woodlands of Ruaha National Park stretched endlessly under the African sky, a landscape where humans were merely temporary visitors and the night belonged to predators. Kellen Rourke was a 29-year-old content creator from Portland, Oregon, whose social media presence focused on what he called authentic wilderness experiences. With roughly 8,000 followers on Instagram, he wasn't famous, but friends said that he was hungry for the kind of viral content that could change that. His posts criticized tourists who stayed in lodges and took guided safaris, calling them inauthentic and disconnected from real nature. This Tanzania trip was meant to be his breakthrough. According to his posts, he'd planned to spend 5 nights in Ruaha National Park, documenting his survival camping experience. To maximize his budget and, he claimed, his authenticity, Kellen deliberately avoided the park's official campsites, which required fees and ranger check-ins. Instead, he'd hiked 3 miles off designated trails to establish an illegal camp in a dense thicket near a seasonal riverbed. He'd brought 2 cameras, one handheld for daytime filming, and one infrared motion-activated camera mounted to a tree approximately 4 feet off the ground, configured for continuous nighttime recording, hoping to catch footage of wildlife passing through. However, Kellen either didn't know or chose to ignore that leopards are among Africa's most efficient predators. These solitary hunters can weigh between 130 and 180 pounds and possess crushing jaw strength capable of collapsing a human windpipe under direct pressure. Unlike lions, which hunt in groups, leopards are ambush predators that rely on stealth and the cover of darkness. They can drag prey twice their body weight up trees and move through dense vegetation without making a sound. That evening, Kellen had filmed himself setting up camp, narrating about embracing the raw wilderness without barriers or false security. He'd deliberately chosen not to build a fire, arguing that artificial light disrupted the natural experience. His dinner consisted of dried fruit and canned beans, the empty can and food scraps tossed near the edge of camp rather than properly stored. As dusk settled, he'd noticed fresh tracks in the sandy soil near the riverbed. Large paw prints pressed deep into damp ground where the animal had shifted its weight, and said that he hoped to film it. Just before full darkness, Kellen heard a series of coughing grunts echoing from somewhere in the thicket, the distinctive territorial call of a leopard. He recorded the sound on his phone, whispering excitedly about how close wildlife was to his camp. What he didn't realize was that leopards vocalize to warn competitors and mark territory. The calls he heard suggested a predator already aware of his presence. As temperature dropped, Kellen climbed into his sleeping bag without securing his tent flaps, wanting unrestricted footage of the campsite for his overnight recording setup. He set both cameras recording, the infrared camera aimed at the clearing and his handheld camera placed inside the tent facing outward. The infrared footage, recovered later by park authorities, showed the attack unfolding with horrifying clarity. At 4:47 a.m., a large male leopard appeared at the edge of the frame, its movements fluid and silent. For nearly 8 minutes, the footage captured the leopard making repeated passes in and out of frame, circling the camp and pausing frequently to assess the area. Its head lowered repeatedly toward the food scraps, investigating the scent. At 4:55 a.m., the leopard approached Kellen's tent. The footage showed the animal's head disappearing into the open tent flap. Seconds later, violent movement erupted, the tent collapsing partially as the leopard dragged Kellen from his sleeping bag. The handheld camera inside the tent, knocked sideways, continued recording. The audio captured fabric tearing, a wet crushing sound, and Kellen's attempts to scream, cut short almost immediately. The leopard had delivered its signature killing bite, clamping powerful jaws around Kellen's throat, causing catastrophic trauma to the trachea and nearby blood vessels. This technique, perfected over millennia, causes rapid blood loss and loss of airflow in seconds. The infrared footage showed Kellen's body being dragged across the clearing, his arms moving weakly for approximately 15 seconds before going still. The leopard pulled him nearly 30 yards from the tent, moving with the effortless strength these predators are known for. The animal paused briefly, tugging at the body as if attempting to reposition it, before beginning to feed, starting with the soft tissue of the abdomen and thighs, typical behavior for big cats consuming large prey when immediate concealment is not possible. Park rangers conducting routine anti-poaching patrol discovered the campsite at 2:15 p.m., approximately 9 hours after the attack. The senior ranger immediately radioed for backup and medical services, though it was obvious no medical intervention could help. The coroner's preliminary report noted catastrophic trauma to the throat and neck, with the trachea completely severed. Massive hemorrhaging had occurred from the carotid artery. Post-mortem predation had resulted in significant tissue loss from the torso and upper legs. The incident was logged internally, but deliberately not publicized to avoid encouraging similar behavior from other adventure seekers. Kellen's family was notified through the authorities, and his body was repatriated after identification through dental records. It was February 9, 2014, near La Ronge, Saskatchewan. The morning light came slow through the northern boreal forest. For two men setting out that day, it seemed like another routine trip into familiar woods. But without warning, it would turn into something neither had imagined possible. David Lasky was 45, a part-time wildlife photographer who lived just outside Prince Albert with his wife and teenage son. He'd spent years tracking animal behavior through remote cameras, learning to move silently and read patterns in snow. Photography was both his passion and side income. His real job was at a lumber supply store, but weekends were for the woods. His cousin Jeff, 42, often joined him on winter runs to retrieve SD cards from trail cams. They had grown up hunting and fishing together, though neither carried a firearm anymore. That weekend, after a light snowfall, late-season hunger had made local deer scarce, and David wanted to check a set of cameras he'd left by a frozen creek north of Waskiesiu Lake. They'd heard distant howls before, never close, and David believed wolves avoided humans by instinct. The plan was simple: a 2-hour ride by snowmobile, a short hike to the cameras, and back before dusk. Wolves in the region were typically gray, thick-coated animals averaging about 90 pounds. They moved in tight family groups of 4 to 8. Their strength lay in coordination, silent pursuit, strategic circling, and patience rather than outright speed. Under normal conditions, they avoided people entirely, focusing on deer and moose along the forest edges. The men dressed in insulated gear and carried only a single red flare for safety. By 9:30 a.m., they parked their snowmobile near the creek and began walking the last half-mile through packed snow, their breath hanging in the still air. At first, everything was normal. They reached the first camera, brushed off the lens, and swapped the SD card. Around 10:15, as they crossed the creek, Jeff's boots slipped on a patch of crusted but solid ice from recent thaw-freeze cycles. David crouched to help him up, steadying his cousin by the arm. That was when both noticed faint movement among the tree line across the creek. The animals stood still at first, only their eyes catching light. Jeff straightened and waved his arms, shouting to scare them off. The wolves didn't run. Unbeknownst to the men, a freshly killed deer lay half-buried in snow about 20 yards behind the tree line, a cached carcass the wolves had dragged there the night before. The pack was food-stressed, defending the cache rather than hunting. They began to fan out slowly, forming a loose semicircle. David muttered that they were just curious, that noise would drive them away, but even as he spoke, one of the wolves lowered its head and started advancing. The men began backing up the slope toward their snowmobile, moving quickly but without turning. The wolves followed, quiet and steady. Then the first lunge came. A gray blur crossed the ice, jaws clamping onto the back of David's leg. The impact drove him face first into the snow. Jeff spun and reached for the flare, but his gloves fumbled with the cap. 2 more wolves broke from the trees, bounding fast, their paws sending up bursts of white powder. David tried to kick free, leaving streaks of blood against the snow. He managed to roll onto his back and swing an arm, hitting one wolf across the muzzle with his camera bag. But another struck from the side, teeth finding his shoulder. Jeff finally snapped the flare to life, the red flame hissing. He swung it toward the animals. One wolf snarled and darted back, fur singed along its flank, but the others held ground. David was on his knees now, one hand pressed to his thigh, blood pumping dark and fast through his fingers. He tried to rise, but his leg gave out beneath him. Jeff charged forward with the flare, yelling, waving it more aggressively. The heat drove them back momentarily, circling just out of reach. David slumped sideways, panting, his breath coming shallow. The flare burned steady, hissing in Jeff's hand as he swung it in wide arcs, forcing the wolves to hesitate. They retreated into the trees, growling low as they vanished from sight. Jeff pressed on his cousin's wound, but it was too deep. Within a minute, the movement stopped. He pulled David's camera bag close and used his phone to call for help. Reception cut in and out, but a faint, intermittent signal reached a nearby ranger station. Authorities arrived about 40 minutes later by snowmobile. They found Jeff sitting beside the body, shaking uncontrollably. Wolf tracks surrounded the site in a broad ring, with drag marks leading back toward the tree line and the cached deer carcass. The official report listed cause of death as exsanguination from femoral artery trauma, consistent with large animal bites. Provincial conservation officers, assisted by federal wildlife agents, closed the area within the hour. Samples were taken from bite margins for DNA analysis, and the implicated pack was later trapped and relocated to a remote management zone north of Reindeer Lake. Wildlife biologists suggested the wolves had been defending a food cache, not actively hunting, but the distinction mattered little to those who saw the aftermath. It was July 15, 2016, and the vast plains of Serengeti National Park stretched endlessly under the African stars, their ancient rhythms undisturbed by the modern world beyond its borders. The Patterson family's campsite sat in a remote section of the park, far from the luxury lodges and established tourist routes. Michael and Sarah Patterson had chosen this budget safari operator specifically for its promise of authentic wilderness experiences, believing their daughters Emma and Sophie would benefit from sleeping under the real African sky rather than behind the walls of expensive accommodations. Michael Patterson had been planning this trip for 2 years, working overtime at his accounting firm in Columbus, Ohio, while Sarah picked up extra nursing shifts at the local hospital. At 32, Michael was determined to give his family an adventure that would create lasting memories, even if it meant cutting corners on luxury to afford the experience. Sarah, 29, had initially been hesitant about bringing their young daughters on such an adventurous trip, but Michael's enthusiasm had eventually won her over. The family had been in Tanzania for 4 days, and the girls were already enchanted by the wildlife they had seen during their game drives. 6-year-old Emma had filled a notebook with drawings of zebras and giraffes, while 4-year-old Sophie collected interesting rocks and leaves that their guide had said were safe to touch. The budget tour operator had provided basic camping equipment and a guide who managed multiple groups simultaneously, often leaving families unsupervised for hours at a time. That evening, the family had set up their tent in an area that their guide had assured them was safe, though he had mentioned almost casually that lions sometimes passed through the region during their nightly hunts. The campsite lacked the electric fencing and elevated platforms that more expensive operators used, relying instead on a basic perimeter of rope and small solar lights that were supposed to deter wildlife. African lions are apex predators that hunt primarily at night, using coordinated pack strategies to take down prey much larger than themselves. Adult males can weigh up to 420 pounds, while females are typically smaller but more agile hunters. Lions have excellent night vision and acute hearing, making them perfectly adapted for nocturnal hunting. Prides often work together during attacks, with different members taking specific roles to ensure successful kills. Around 10 p.m., Michael noticed that their tent's main zipper had broken, leaving a gap of several inches that couldn't be properly closed. Sarah suggested they ask their guide for help, but Michael was reluctant to wake the man who had been managing 3 different campsites and seemed exhausted. Instead, Michael decided to attempt a temporary repair using the small sewing kit that Sarah had packed for emergencies. Michael worked by flashlight while Sarah and the girls tried to sleep, but the repair proved more difficult than expected. The tent's fabric was thick and the broken zipper teeth were jammed, requiring him to cut away damaged sections and attempt to create a makeshift closure using safety pins and cord. A pride of 5 lions had been hunting in the area and had detected the unusual activity at the human camp. The broken tent, the moving light, and the unfamiliar sounds had drawn their curiosity, and they began approaching the campsite with the stealth that made them such effective predators. Around 3 a.m., Michael was still working on the tent repair when he heard a low growling sound just outside the fabric walls. He froze, his flashlight beam wavering, as he tried to determine the source of the noise. The growling grew louder and was joined by additional sounds that suggested multiple animals were surrounding their tent. The first lion pushed through the gap in the broken zipper, its massive head and shoulders forcing the opening wider as it entered the confined space of the tent. Michael grabbed the flashlight and tried to use it to drive the animal back, but the lion's predatory instincts had been fully triggered by the scent and sounds of the trapped humans. Sarah screamed as the lion's jaws clamped down on Michael's arm, the powerful bite crushing bone and tearing through muscle tissue. The sound woke Emma and Sophie, who began crying as they witnessed their father being attacked by the massive predator. Sarah tried to shield her daughters while calling for help, but their remote location meant no assistance was available. A second lion entered the tent through the widened opening, followed quickly by a third. The confined space became a death trap as the pride's coordinated hunting instincts took over. Michael's attempts to fight back were futile against the lion's superior strength and natural weapons, his injuries from the first attack leaving him unable to effectively protect his family. The lion's attack was swift and methodical, their natural hunting behaviors adapted perfectly for taking down multiple prey in a confined space. Emma and Sophie's cries were cut short as the pride's attack continued, the lion's powerful jaws and claws inflicting fatal injuries on all 4 family members within minutes. The guide discovered the scene at dawn when he arrived to check on the family's campsite. The lions had departed hours earlier, leaving behind a scene of devastation that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Emergency services were called, but all 4 family members had died from massive trauma inflicted during the coordinated attack. The investigation revealed multiple safety violations by the tour operator, including inadequate campsite security, insufficient guide supervision, and failure to provide proper safety equipment. The company's permits were revoked, and new regulations were implemented requiring electric fencing and armed guards at all camping sites in predator areas. areas. The Patterson family's deaths sent shockwaves through the safari tourism industry and prompted their extended family to advocate for stricter safety standards for budget tour operators. The tragedy highlighted the deadly consequences of cutting corners on safety measures in one of the world's most dangerous environments. It was January 8, 2017, when the oppressive humidity of Queensland's wet season hung over the Daintree River estuary, where ancient rainforest met the crocodile-infested waters of Australia's far north. The murky, tannin-stained tidal waters wound through one of the world's oldest surviving rainforests, creating a primordial landscape where saltwater crocodiles had ruled as apex predators for millions of years. Tracy Coleman, a 35-year-old adventure tour guide from Brisbane, had built her reputation on providing authentic Australian wilderness experiences to international tourists. However, Tracy was relatively new to the Daintree region, having recently expanded her operations from the safer waters around Brisbane. While experienced with river tours, she had only been operating in crocodile country for 8 months and was still learning the unique dangers of the far north. That morning, Tracy was leading a small group of 4 American tourists seeking an authentic Australian adventure experience. The group consisted of 2 wealthy couples from Texas who had specifically requested off-the-beaten-path experiences and were paying premium rates for exclusive access. Tracy's boat had been navigating the Daintree River estuary system, showcasing the unique ecosystem where World Heritage rainforest meets tidal waters. Local Aboriginal guide Jimmy Calcara had warned Tracy about increased crocodile activity due to recent flooding, which had stirred up the ecosystem and made the massive reptiles more active and unpredictable. Experienced guides in crocodile country maintain absolute rules about water contact. No hands, feet, or equipment in the water under any circumstances. The clients had accidentally dropped $8,000 worth of professional camera equipment overboard in what appeared to be a shallow section near the bank. The gear was clearly visible in the clear water, tantalizingly close to shore. The clients became increasingly agitated, with one couple threatening to demand a full refund and leave devastating reviews that could destroy Tracy's expanding business. Saltwater crocodiles are among the world's most formidable predators, with large males reaching lengths of over 20 feet and weighing up to 2,200 pounds. These apex predators are perfectly adapted ambush hunters, capable of remaining motionless for hours before exploding into action with devastating speed. Their powerful jaws generate tremendous bite forces, making them among the most dangerous predators on Earth. Tracy made a series of increasingly poor decisions. First, she used a boat hook to try reaching the equipment, extending herself dangerously over the water's edge. When that failed, she considered using the boat's anchor rope to snag the gear. Finally, under intense client pressure and fearing financial ruin from negative reviews, Tracy made the fatal error of leaning too far over the boat's edge while attempting to reach the equipment with a net. A massive male saltwater crocodile had been lying motionless in the deeper water nearby, perfectly camouflaged among submerged logs and vegetation. The recent floods had brought the ancient predator into shallower hunting grounds, where it waited with prehistoric patience. As Tracy stretched over the boat's gunwale, her balance shifted. The boat rocked slightly, and she fell forward into the water with a splash that immediately attracted the crocodile's attention. The massive reptile erupted from its hiding place with explosive force. Tracy had barely surfaced when the crocodile struck with devastating precision. The attack was swift and overwhelming, giving her no opportunity to escape or defend herself. The client's screams echoed across the estuary as they witnessed the attack, but it was over within moments. Emergency services were called immediately, but Tracy was already beyond help. Queensland authorities investigated the incident and issued renewed safety advisories to tour operators, emphasizing existing protocols about maintaining safe distances from water in crocodile habitat. The investigation reinforced that established guidelines were adequate when properly followed, but highlighted the ongoing challenges of client pressure and commercial considerations in wilderness tourism. Body recovery required specialized teams and took several days due to the challenging conditions and the need to locate and safely remove the crocodile from the area. It was September 19, 2017, and the sun hung low over the Okavango Delta, painting the channels in amber light as the waters began their nightly transformation from tourist paradise to predator territory. Mara and Jonah Levin's unguided canoe gliding silently through water that concealed one of Africa's most lethal animals. Mara Levin was a 34-year-old pediatric nurse from Cape Town. Jonah, 36, worked as a logistics coordinator for a shipping company and prided himself on his kayaking experience along South Africa's coastlines. He had logged hundreds of hours on the water, navigating ocean swells and river rapids with competence. This 10th anniversary trip to Botswana was meant to combine adventure with romance, and Jonah had insisted on renting and personally poling a canoe. The narrow channel near dusk was scenic, bordered by rustling papyrus. The rental operator gave Jonah a safety sheet warning against narrow channels at sunrise and sunset, advising a local guide. A hippo had charged a tourist here 2 months earlier. Hippopotamuses are responsible for more human deaths in Africa than any other large animal, killing an estimated 500 people annually. Despite their seemingly docile appearance, they are exceptionally aggressive and territorial, particularly in water. A male hippo can weigh up to 4,000 pounds and possess tusks that can grow to 20 inches long, capable of biting with a force enough to snap a small boat in half or crush a human torso. As they paddled deeper into the channel, the sounds changed. Deep grunting echoed across the water, the territorial vocalizations of male hippos, but the reeds and winding waterway distorted the direction and distance. 2 guided Mokoro groups had already halted at the channel entrance, their polers recognizing the grunts as too close and too aggressive for safe passage and refusing to proceed. One tourist seated in the front of a Mokoro lifted his phone to record the scene, intending to capture the approaching sunset. They heard Mara suggest they turn back, noting how the fading light made it difficult to see into the brown water, but Jonah assured her they would loop back after reaching a lagoon marked on his GPS, which was lagging due to canopy and water reflections. The channel narrowed to barely 15 feet across, and the water visibility dropped to less than 6 inches. The Levin's canoe drifted over a slight lift beneath the hull that he tried to push away from with his pole. It was not a sandbar. The hippo had been resting fully submerged in the center of the channel, and the pressure of the canoe passing directly over its back triggered an explosive territorial response. The phone recording from the tourist captured the animal erupting beneath them with such force that the wooden hull cracked and split, the sound echoing across the water. Both occupants were thrown violently as the vessel capsized. Mara surfaced first, gasping, and immediately the hippo's massive head lunged toward her. Its jaws, capable of opening extraordinarily wide, clamped down across her torso with the sound of snapping wood. Multiple displaced rib fractures caused punctured lungs and catastrophic thoracic trauma. Jonah surfaced 6 feet away, screaming his wife's name, before the hippo turned its attention to him. The animal surged through the water with shocking speed, lunging with explosive force through the shallow channel. The initial impact was head-on, the hippo's skull connecting with Jonah's chest like a battering ram, audibly cracking his sternum and launching him backward. Before he could sink, the hippo's jaws closed around his left thigh, the tusks penetrating deep into muscle and severing his femoral artery. Blood jetted into the water in rhythmic spurts, synchronized with his failing heartbeat. The hippo made a final charge, rising partially out of the water to bring its full weight down on Jonah's upper body. His chest cavity collapsed, and the subsequent head trauma was immediately fatal. The entire attack lasted approximately 35 seconds. Both bodies floated briefly before the hippo pushed them toward the reeds, still perceiving them as territorial threats. The witnesses downstream, 12 tourists and 3 guides in traditional Mokoro canoes, watched in frozen horror, too far to intervene and aware that any approach would provoke another attack. The lead guide immediately radioed local wildlife authorities and emergency services. Due to the remote location and the danger posed by the animal, recovery was delayed until trained wildlife officials could secure the area and coordinate with veterinary specialists. Authorities arrived almost an hour later. The hippo had retreated but remained in the vicinity of the bodies. After the animal left, recovery teams retrieved the Levins. The coroner's preliminary report noted that Mara sustained catastrophic thoracic trauma with multiple rib fractures, bilateral pneumothorax, and cardiac injury, with death occurring within seconds. Jonah's injuries included massive blood loss from femoral artery transection, multiple compound fractures, severe head trauma, and crushing chest injuries. The canoe rental company installed new warning signage and temporarily restricted access to the channel during dawn and dusk hours. Local concession operators implemented mandatory guide requirements for water travel in that area. It was November 15, 2016, in the remote forests of Primorsky Krai, eastern Russia. Snow fell in a steady veil, muting the usual sounds of the taiga. Nikolai Baranov's radio had been silent since morning. The last check-in, brief and routine, gave no hint that by evening his route would end in silence and blood. Nikolai was 52 and had spent most of his life in these forests. A forestry worker by trade, he managed patrols in the buffer zones near the Sikhoty Alin Mountains, where he monitored traps, logging boundaries, and poaching activity. He lived alone in a small settlement near Dalnaryshensk, his routine built around the forest's rhythms. That week, he had been assigned to survey a hunting reserve, following reports of wolves pushing closer to villages. He rode out before dawn on his snowmobile, a canvas bag packed with bread, tea, a hand axe, and flares. Colleagues said he often preferred working solo. He claimed a second engine just scared off wildlife. That day's assignment was simple. Document animal tracks after the first full snow. Wolves had been increasingly active, driven from higher ground after a collapse in wild boar numbers. Wolves here could travel up to 20 miles in a single night, driven by hunger across frozen ground and sparse woodland. Their diets shifted with the season: deer in autumn, carrion or smaller mammals in the hard months of winter. When deep cold set in and prey vanished beneath ice or snow, instinct sometimes blurred into desperation. A human scent, faint and unfamiliar, might still trigger the same ancient reflex: to follow, test, and close the distance. Locals warned of animals following sled trails at dusk. Nikolai heard the same warnings at the station that morning but didn't take them seriously. He had checked his flare gun but left his rifle behind, citing its weight and his short route. By noon, weather had shifted fast, gusting snow and dropping visibility. His supervisor made several radio attempts that went unanswered, assuming battery failure from the cold. When evening came and Nikolai still hadn't returned, Yevgeny, a neighboring ranger and longtime friend, prepared to follow his route before dark. Yevgeny rode out around 5 p.m., with a flashlight mounted on his snowmobile and a sidearm holstered under his coat. Tracks were faint but visible, a single snowmobile line winding north, then stopping abruptly about 800 meters from the ridge. There, the engine was half buried in snow, its headlights still faintly glowing. Prints showed that Nikolai had dismounted, perhaps to clear ice from the track. Around the site, another pattern emerged: paw marks, deep and overlapping, circling. The snow bore drag lines, evidence of pacing. Then, the circle tightened. From that point, the scene unfolded through what Yevgeny later described as a sequence of struggle. Human footprints turned erratic, moving backward. Closer inspection revealed a snapped branch at chest height and a torn glove 10 feet away. A smear of blood marked the snowmobile's side panel. 30 feet beyond, the snow showed clear impressions of multiple bodies pressing down, wolves and man. The wolves had likely approached silently, using the cover of snowfall and wind. Initial bites were to the legs, pulling him down. Blood spray against nearby birch bark indicated arterial injury within seconds. As the attack progressed, the evidence suggested coordinated movement. Bite patterns indicated coordinated restraint from multiple angles. His jacket was shredded along the spine, showing where one animal had clamped onto his back while another tore at the neck. Boot prints ended mid-stride, replaced by drag marks. Yevgeny followed them cautiously, revolver drawn, the forest unnervingly still. He found the body 30 meters downhill near a frozen stream. The snow around it was flattened and red. The wolves had likely fed briefly before retreating. Later investigations showed that the surrounding prints showed at least 4 individuals: 2 larger adults, 2 smaller juveniles. Yevgeny radioed the base immediately. It took nearly an hour for a snow vehicle from the nearest post to arrive, by which time darkness had swallowed the clearing. The men lifted the body onto a tarp, careful not to disturb the bite patterns for analysis. The stench of blood lingered even in the cold. The pack didn't return, but distant howls echoed as the rescuers secured the area. Nikolai's remains were taken to Dalnaryshensk for examination. Autopsy confirmed catastrophic blood loss, with multiple punctures to major vessels and crushing trauma to the neck vertebrae consistent with a fatal bite. Time of death was estimated shortly after the onset of the attack. The official report listed predatory behavior exacerbated by winter scarcity. Specialists noted that 2016 saw an unusual decline in prey density across the region. The incident received a single mention on regional news, framed as a tragic encounter during severe weather. There was no footage, only photographs from the recovery team that were never released publicly. It was September 28, 2017, and the crystal-clear channels of the Okavango Delta reflected the African sky like mirrors, their pristine waters hiding some of the continent's most dangerous predators beneath their deceptively peaceful surface. Dr. James Mitchell had been living at his remote research station for 6 months, studying hippo behavior patterns in one of the world's most pristine wetland ecosystems. The isolation and intimate access to wildlife represented the opportunity of a lifetime for the marine biologist turned conservationist. Dr. James Mitchell had dedicated his career to understanding aquatic ecosystems, earning his PhD in marine biology before transitioning to African wildlife conservation. At 35, he was considered one of the leading experts on hippo behavior, but his passion for his work had led him to take increasingly risky approaches to data collection. His research station was located in one of the most remote sections of the Delta, accessible only by boat and staffed by just James and a single research assistant. James had been documenting the daily movement patterns of a local hippopod, tracking their feeding routes and territorial behaviors to better understand their impact on the Delta's ecosystem. His work required him to collect water samples and observe the animals at close range, often working alone when his assistant was occupied with other research tasks. That morning, James had planned to collect water samples from a narrow channel that the hippos used as a highway between their daytime resting areas and nighttime feeding grounds. He had observed their patterns for months and believed he understood their schedule well enough to work safely in the area during what he considered low-risk periods. Hippopotamuses are among Africa's most dangerous animals, responsible for more human deaths than any other large mammal on the continent. Adult bulls can weigh over 4,000 pounds and are capable of running at speeds up to 30 miles per hour both on land and in water. Their massive jaws can open to 150 degrees and deliver bite forces exceeding 1,800 pounds per square inch, easily capable of crushing a human body or biting a canoe in half. Hippos are highly territorial and become extremely aggressive during mating season or when protecting their young. James waded into the channel carrying his water sampling equipment, confident that the hippos were all resting on land during the heat of the day. The water was chest deep in the center of the channel, but James had worked in similar conditions dozens of times without incident. What he didn't know was that a large territorial bull had recently moved into the area and was resting submerged in the deeper water just upstream from his sampling location. The massive hippo had been aware of James's presence from the moment he entered the water, but had remained motionless in the murky depths while assessing the threat. Hippos can hold their breath for up to 5 minutes and often rest completely submerged during the day, making them nearly invisible to humans working in the water above them. As James moved deeper into the channel to reach the optimal sampling location, he unknowingly entered the hippo's territorial zone. The 3,500-pound bull erupted from the water without warning, his massive bulk creating a wave that knocked James off balance before the animal's jaws could reach him. James tried to retreat toward the shore, but the hippo's speed in water made escape impossible. The massive animal's jaws clamped down on James's torso with bone-crushing force, the impact driving him underwater as the hippo's territorial aggression took over completely. The hippo's attack was prolonged and brutal, the massive animal using his enormous size and strength to ensure that the perceived threat was completely eliminated. James's research equipment scattered across the channel as the hippo continued his assault, his powerful jaws and massive weight inflicting fatal injuries that no human could survive. James's research assistant discovered his body hours later when he failed to return to the research station at the scheduled time. The investigation revealed that James had been working alone in known hippo territory during mating season, when the animal's territorial aggression was at its peak. James's death prompted a complete review of safety protocols for wildlife researchers working in aquatic environments and highlighted the extreme danger posed by hippos to humans working in their territory. His research station was relocated to a safer area, and new regulations required researchers to work in pairs when collecting samples in hippo habitat. The tragedy served as a reminder that even experienced wildlife researchers could fall victim to the unpredictable nature of African animals, and that familiarity with wildlife behavior was no guarantee of safety when working in close proximity to dangerous species. It was November 14, 2015, when the dense canopy of Uganda's Kibale National Park filtered the equatorial sun into dappled patches of light across the forest floor. This wilderness harbored one of the highest concentrations of primates in the world. including over 1,500 chimpanzees living in complex social groups throughout the protected area. Shane Porter, a 29-year-old primatology graduate student from Oxford University, had arrived at the Makerere University Biological Field Station to conduct research on chimpanzee territorial behavior for his PhD thesis. Known among his colleagues for his methodical approach and strict adherence to safety protocols, Shane had spent 6 months gaining experience with habituated chimpanzee groups and was considered one of the more cautious researchers in the program. Shane had been tracking a habituated chimpanzee community for 3 months, documenting their daily behavioral patterns and social interactions. The community consisted of approximately 15 individuals across various age groups, led by a dominant alpha male. Shane's research focused on territorial disputes and boundary maintenance, requiring him to follow the group during their daily foraging activities. The research station's protocols required researchers to maintain a minimum 7-meter distance from chimpanzees and retreat immediately if aggressive displays began escalating. Chimpanzees are humanity's closest living relatives, sharing 98.8% of human DNA, but possess physical capabilities that significantly exceed human strength and agility. Adult males can weigh up to 150 pounds and are considerably stronger than humans, with powerful canine teeth that serve as formidable weapons. These highly intelligent primates live in complex social hierarchies, where aggression plays a crucial role in establishing dominance and defending territory. On his 89th day of observations, Shane was following the group when they encountered members of a rival community near a territorial boundary. The encounter began with typical aggressive displays including chest beating, branch shaking, and loud vocalizations from both groups. Shane positioned himself at what he believed was a safe distance from the confrontation. However, during the escalating territorial dispute, several agitated chimpanzees became increasingly unpredictable. In the chaos of the encounter, Shane found himself too close to the conflict zone as tensions reached their peak. The alpha male, highly agitated from the territorial confrontation, suddenly charged toward Shane. Whether interpreting the researcher as a threat or simply redirecting territorial aggression, the chimpanzee attacked with explosive force. The attack was swift and devastating, with the chimpanzee's powerful bite inflicting severe trauma to Shane's neck and upper body. Despite his experience and training, Shane was unable to escape or defend himself against the animal's superior strength and aggression. The attack lasted only minutes, but the injuries were catastrophic. Shane succumbed to his wounds before help could arrive at the remote location. The incident shocked the research community and led to extensive reviews of safety protocols for field researchers. While fatal attacks on researchers are extremely rare, Shane's death served as a tragic reminder of the inherent risks in studying powerful wild animals, even those considered habituated to human presence. The Kabeli research program implemented additional safety measures following the incident, including mandatory 2-person teams for all chimpanzee observations and enhanced emergency communication systems. Shane Porter's death remains one of the few documented fatal attacks on a researcher by habituated chimpanzees, highlighting that even our closest evolutionary relatives can pose serious dangers under certain circumstances. It was February 19, 2013, and the mist-shrouded mountains of Virunga National Park provided sanctuary for some of the world's last remaining mountain gorillas. Catherine Williams had been volunteering with a gorilla conservation program for 4 months, working to protect these magnificent creatures from poaching and habitat destruction. The 26-year-old veterinary student from Vancouver had developed a deep emotional connection to the gorilla families she helped monitor, often staying late at the research station to observe their behavior. Catherine Williams had always dreamed of working with endangered species, choosing veterinary medicine specifically to pursue a career in wildlife conservation. Her volunteer position at Virunga represented the culmination of years of study and preparation, offering hands-on experience with one of the world's most endangered primates. Catherine's dedication to her work was evident in her willingness to extend her volunteer period and take on additional responsibilities beyond her original assignment. The conservation program where Catherine worked focused on monitoring gorilla health and behavior while protecting them them from the constant threat of poaching. The work required researchers to maintain close contact with habituated gorilla families, observing their daily activities and documenting any signs of illness or injury. Catherine had been assigned to work with a family group led by a large silverback male who had been showing signs of respiratory illness. That morning, Catherine was conducting a routine health assessment of the gorilla family when she noticed that the silverback's condition appeared to be worsening. The massive male was showing signs of lethargy and had been coughing frequently, symptoms that could indicate a serious respiratory infection that might spread to other members of the group. Mountain gorillas are incredibly powerful primates, with adult silverbacks weighing up to 440 pounds and possessing strength estimated at 10 times that of an adult human. Despite their generally peaceful nature, gorillas can become extremely dangerous when they feel threatened or are protecting their family group. Silverbacks are particularly aggressive when ill or stressed, as their leadership role requires them to defend their group against any perceived threats. Their massive hands, powerful arms, and large canine teeth make them capable of inflicting fatal injuries even without malicious intent. Catherine's concern for the silverback's health led her to approach closer than normal protocol allowed, hoping to get a better assessment of his breathing patterns and overall condition. She had worked with this particular family for months and believed she understood their individual personalities and tolerance levels, but illness had made the silverback unpredictable and more aggressive than usual. As Catherine moved within the silverback's personal space to observe his breathing, the massive gorilla interpreted her approach as a threat to his weakened condition and his family's safety. Gorillas communicate through body language and territorial displays, but Catherine's focus on his medical condition caused her to miss the warning signs that should have prompted her to retreat. The silverback's attack was sudden and devastating, his massive hands grabbing Catherine and pulling her to the ground, while his powerful arms delivered crushing blows to her head and torso. The gorilla's incredible strength made resistance impossible as he continued his assault, his protective instincts driving him to eliminate what he perceived as a threat to his family. Catherine's screams echoed through the forest, alerting her colleagues who were working with other gorilla groups in the area. They arrived to find the silverback still attacking Catherine, his violent behavior preventing them from immediately intervening to help their colleague. The researchers eventually managed to drive the gorilla away using noise and distraction techniques, but Catherine had already sustained fatal injuries from the prolonged attack. The remote mountain location meant that medical evacuation would take hours, and Catherine died from massive trauma before help could arrive. The investigation revealed that Catherine had violated safety protocols by approaching too close to an ill and stressed silverback without proper backup from other researchers. Her death led to revised safety guidelines for gorilla research and highlighted the unpredictable nature of wild gorilla behavior, even among animals that had been habituated to human presence. Catherine's tragic death served as a reminder that even the most dedicated conservationists could fall victim to the unpredictable nature of wild animals, and that emotional connections to wildlife could lead to dangerous lapses in judgment. Her story became a cautionary tale within the conservation community about the importance of maintaining professional distance and following safety protocols when working with potentially dangerous species. Thanks for watching. Want to watch more? Click on your screen now